I would like to follow up on a couple things that were said in other sections, though, that I think are super important. One is I think that people said it in a bunch of different ways, but we don't have people at every track to be able to do all these jobs that we'd like them to be able to do, which requires some of us to do some of our own self-policing, right? Like if Matt sees somebody doing something, for maybe in support of me, like seatbelts look like they're in wrong, I think we got to go with the see something, say something. And, people don't like to hear about that, especially racers. I could be perfectly honest with you. Matt don't like me to tell him what I think he should be doing with his car, or maybe something that I think is wrong on his car. But you have to have, the wherewithal to be able to go over there and say something to him about it. A great example of which that I see all the time, I'm going to flip this seat around a little bit to talk about some different things, is like the way that these 3-bar sliders are installed on here, right? If you have ever, and this is kind of hard to point and talk and hold this microphone, right? But you see here how you can only see one of these silver bars? That means that this is installed correctly. If you see 2 silver bars, it is not installed correctly. That's very simple, very straightforward. If I'm walking through the pits and I'm walking by his car, and I do have to do it because it's like a force of habit for me. Like I look at every set of seatbelts that I can see, and if I see that, I'm going to say something to somebody. And again, they don't like to hear about it. They don't like to hear about, hey, you did something wrong, right? Case in point at the dome, they had it through this fitting. If it's correct, the webbing will be there through there 3 times. At the dome, there was one through there 2 times, and that loose end was less than a 1/4 inch from going back through that bar. And that guy lit me up about saying something about it. But at some point, I said something about it that's going to make me sleep better. If he doesn't fix it, I can't go over there and twist his arm to make him fix it. I'm going to mention it, but it's his responsibility to do it. Does that make sense? So I think we do need some self-policing. Thank you, Matt. Another thing I want to follow up from Chris's section, right? When he talked about distribution of the way the seats are mounted and getting those points far apart, 2 years ago, I'm not going to say the driver. I'm going to say that they're a top-tier driver. I'm going to say that they probably have at least 1 or 2 types of national championships in the late model division. Had a seat that was broken right here in an incident. Broken. And it was because of the way the seat was mounted in the car and the way it was able to twist in the vehicle. So it's super important to make sure that you have the seat mounted correctly with enough bolts, with, as Chris said, big washers and everything to make sure things don't pull through. And if you have questions about that stuff, reach out to the manufacturers and get their guidance. They're going to not steer you in the wrong direction, right? That thing about the seats and buying seats that are used, right? That's a great idea to go to find a seat, that's more affordable for you, but it really has to fit you. That seat that was on the left, if we remember it, we laughed at that seat, probably some of us, we see it and we're like, haha. It's still out there, right? And it is super painful to go to some of these races and see even 4-cylinder cars with no right side headrest, none whatsoever, with no right side shoulder, nothing whatsoever. Those cars, when they get upside down, they weren't built to race, and they will tumble in a hurry. If you ever watch 4-cylinders at I-55 in St. Louis, we are hauling the mail around that place with 4-cylinder cars, right? They'll power roll 5 and 6 rolls in a second. They need just as good a seat as you need in a modified and a late model, right? So don't let them tell you, hey, I'm not going fast enough for that. You're going fast enough for it. Trust me, all right? But those were a couple things from a couple other sections. But in general, belts, like for ours, obviously, I'm Neil with Hooker Harness, if you don't know that. Most of you have seen me or spoken to me already. But we try to build everything to probably beyond the limits of what your body can handle. We don't have a lower, version that's going to be cheaper because we use cheaper parts on it, right? We're going to do the same for everybody. So everything's about the little tweaks and the little thoughts and the little things that you can do to make the system better. So as an example, here you saw the back head as an example of our shoulder harness brackets where you can keep those shoulder harnesses in the right position. Where we get into some trouble with that is especially on like sprint cars, when there's just a tube back there, when they're flipping in every direction and landing on every different corner, every other flip, this stuff is moving around back here. That's not ideal. When that moves around, the head restraints come off. You need everything to work properly. You need to make sure that that stuff is in the right position all the time, that's installed correctly, right? Little tweaks on like our shoulder harness, something we don't look at enough. Like we may be doing inspection of a shoulder harness at a racetrack, and I'll be honest with you, when I was first doing them, I probably made the mistake as well. The front of those harnesses look spectacular, right? But do we ever turn it over and look at what the back of the harness looks like? Somebody earlier was talking about friction and things rubbing up against the fire suit and rubbing up against the head restraints. This piece that's on here, this black piece, is something that you can get on our harnesses. It's for two reasons. It is to grip the surface of the Hans device. In here, you can kind of see the discoloration. There's two strips of rubber pellets. Those rubber pellets will grip against the surface of a Hans device to make sure that that Hans device stays in place and will not come off. The Hans does have a tendency in a side impact, kind of like that Dale Earnhardt angle, to want to walk out from underneath of the straps, and that will make sure that they stay on the straps. But what it also does is a few years ago, if you guys remember Hans devices, they came out with a surface that was like a sandpapery, gritty surface, because the thought that that was going to grab the belts better. But what it actually did is if you got this part right here where the webbing is on the hardware, on the bottom of the Hans, it would rub through the back of the harness. So again, flipping it over makes a huge difference. I actually have an example in our booth of one from a monster truck where the webbing is more than 50% cut through there, but from the front of it, it looks great. The back of it is completely destroyed, right? So when you're looking at harnesses, you kind of got to do a full inspection of them. But different things that we do typically in stock cars, late models, and modifieds is that somebody kind of referenced it earlier. Just because it has an SFI tag on it doesn't mean it's exactly the same. Just because it looks similar doesn't mean that it performs the same. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, there are in harnesses different webbing sizes, different webbing materials, different thread sizes, different thread materials. Everything adds up. Everything compounds to add strength. Right? On our systems, one big difference you'll see is like, yes, these are adjustable, but we put an adjustable crotch strap in the majority of our systems so that you can move the whole system up or down on you inside the cockpit without having to remove one of the pieces. Even with our ratcheting system, we still generally put a adjuster on this side so that if you were in that situation where you had two drivers, you can adjust that side down a little bit or up a little bit without having to, like when I was racing, to take the seat out and to adjust that. Without that adjuster in there, I had to take off the roof, steering column, take the seat apart, and get the seat out just to get to that bolt, right? In this case, I'm going to bolt it in, and I'm just going to forget about it because the adjuster's up on the top side, all right? So all 5 pieces are adjustable from inside the car or vehicle, which is super nice. A little thing that we talked about, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, the gentleman with the black hat and the hoodie there. Spencer was talking about the angles and everything. A lot of the manufacturers are certainly going to put the points, most of the points are going to be in there for you. So you're going to have your seatbelt mount. But this is an example of what you can do with that, right? Hey, how do I know what angle to go off of here? Well, this side's set up with a bushing system, so where this will float on there. So whatever direction the body goes in an impact, this will follow the body. Does that make sense? This is what killed, like Earnhardt. His was mounted like this, firm, tight. Does that make sense? When this, I'm sorry, I can't do both things, so I'm just going to shout for a second. All right? Was going up here, See the problem? That cuts the belts. That's called dumping. All right? If literally he had a 5-cent bushing on there like that, likely he would be alive today. All right? But it was mounted in this direction and locked firm. If you look at our anchors inside here, there's a metal flange that's rounded so that the webbing isn't going against any type of sharp edge, right? So it's all these little tiny things that maybe you don't see that are different. And why I point that out is because a lot of people's objection to what we do is we probably have the most expensive belts on the market. I mean, that's a truth, right? But outside of this, we have sets that go up from $500 to $1,000 more than this set, right? We have sets over $1,000 depending what you want to do. Just like Velocita was talking about, they have some super high-end stuff. We don't use it a ton, but it's out there and it's approved and it's available if you had to get to that level. All right. Other questions we get on ours, just on our stuff, just for a minute, is we put these pads on the seatbelt for a reason. Couple of reasons. It distributes the load, but what it also does is it keeps all the hardware off of you. See how the hardware is always going to be on top of the pad? That's going to be a comfort thing. It's going to really help also distribute the load if you do have an impact. The majority of what we do in stock cars, in late models, sprint cars, and modifieds is a ratcheting system on the seatbelt, though, if you've never seen ours. We developed that in 2001, and you get in there, and literally you just use a tool like this to just tighten yourself into the seat. And the reason behind that is if we can control your hips, we can control all the body movement. If you've ever raced a car and you have this feeling throughout a race, you have this feeling where you keep tightening your belts all race. Well, what's really happening is your belts aren't loosening. What's happening is your hips are moving forward, and you're trying to compensate for that by pulling down. But what you're actually doing is putting your back in a more vulnerable position for injury, all right? Because your hips are way out now, right? With a ratcheting system like that, when I can keep you planted and tighter than you can ever get a standard set of seatbelts, you will not have that loosening sensation. You literally will be sitting straight up the entire race. I don't want you to have to think about any of that until you get out of the car. Does that kind of all make sense, if you will? Anybody's free to hop in this and try this. We'll have it in our booth all week here. Big things is you always want to make sure that the belts are making kind of a perfect pattern in the middle. Everything should come straight off the shoulders. The crotch strap should come straight up. And both of these straps on the seatbelt should come right across your hips. If something is not in that case, if it feels like it's pinning yourself down, you probably have a crotch strap that doesn't have an adjuster in it, and the crotch strap needs to be lengthened. If you feel the belts are up into your stomach, same situation, the crotch strap's too long now. On our system, you can adjust that from inside the car and not have to go under the seat and remove the crotch strap and put the crotch strap back in. All right, Brian?
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the dates on belts, like the picture I got there? Is that something important, something we need to be looking at?
It is, and tags, if this is something people don't really know, and again, spreading the good word is always good. So this is a great thing to talk about. So the SFI tags have changed over the last couple years. Years ago, the tags had months on them, and then they had years listed on them. And you punched a little hole to say, hey, it was made in January of 2025. And then we said the belts were good 2 years from that date. All right? Now, if you remember Brad talking about invalid and counterfeit tags and things like that, there's a certain amount of shenanigans that were going on with those tags. And one of those shenanigans was belt manufacturers were saying that their belts were made in the USA, and they were not. And it takes time when the belts are made in another country and they come here, right? I put a tag on there. Now, how long does it take to get here, and do those tags date, and does that date impact Brian that bought these belts and is expecting them to work for 2 years? Is everybody kind of following me? Well, the shenanigans were they weren't punching the holes there, and they were getting shipped here, and they were saying, okay, Brian, when you sell these, open the box and punch the holes so we don't get in trouble, and then your people that you're selling them to are going to get 2 years out of them, okay? Well, they got smart to that. So they changed the tags a couple years ago, similar to the tag you can see there, where now the date that's on the tag is the date that they expire. That date is for 2 years for SFI. Now, there are some sanctioning bodies that will say, hey, you can use your belts for 3 years. You have to check with your own sanctioning body. That's something you have to do. So in this case, that belt right there expires December of 24. If your sanctioning body says you can use them for 3 years, you should be able to use them December of 25, but you need to verify that with them. But that is not a manufacturer date anymore. That is an expiration date. The other thing is there's only 2 months that come on those tags now. There's December and there's June. There's no other months printed, okay? Technically, that's to your benefit, right? Remind me what tags are right now. They're June of 27. Okay. You order set now. The tags are June of 27 that we're putting on there. That means you're going to get all of the 25 season, all of the 26 season, and you're going to get half of the 27 season. So you're actually getting 2.5 years there. See how that's to the end customer's benefit? Now, the negative to that is, well, in May, I looked at my tag and it said they were still good, and I didn't replace them, but when I went to Summer Nationals race, now they said I'm expired and I can't race. And you have to remember, either A, I need to do that at the beginning of the season, or I need to remind myself to pull them out or buy new ones, or in our case, we can do some rebuilds if the hardware's all good, but you need to get them replaced by that date. Does that kind of make sense? So then you get those ones, they're going to end in probably December, so that kind of puts you on a normal cycle. Then the next one, it's going to end in June again, you're off cycle. Then the next one's going to end in December again, you'll be back on cycle. Does that make sense, everybody? I know it's a little confusing, but I hope I'm doing the best that everybody's understanding it. I'll pause on that one because there's generally some questions there, but if I did good, maybe there's no questions.
No question there, but shoulder hardware replacement, I see in that
Generally speaking, you want the adjuster just off of the bottom of the Hans device.
Yeah, that was the question. I just didn't know if there was a preferred location for them.
Yeah, it should be just off the bottom of the Hans device for the reason that I said about it rubbing. If you do it the other way and that adjuster is on the Hans device, it's going to create a friction point and it's going to wear that webbing. Belt care that I see that he has on there. I'd love to say that racers use common sense, but unfortunately, we are not the best with common sense sometimes, all right? And here's a great example of that as it comes to belts. Would you power wash your car with no shoes on? Have you ever done it? I actually did it once. Okay. Run that power washer across your foot, a good power washer, what happens? Cuts you, right? Do you think that the thread in that webbing is any different than your skin? People tell me, oh, I power wash my belts. That's how I make them look good. You're cutting the webbing every time you do that. You should not get the webbing wet, right? Chris was talking about the foam and how the foam changes. Like, we have to be thoughtful and give some care to the seat, thoughtful and give some care to the seat belts. As an example, what I always did on our car when I was racing is I always took like a Walmart bag. Everybody's familiar with what I'm talking about, plastic one. Pull this out of the side of the seat, wrap that all up in a Walmart bag so it doesn't get wet. And then on the actual seat itself, I always took a 55-gallon trash bag, slid it down one side, and the seat and the seat belts only got wet slightly back here when I was cleaning the deck. But I want to keep as much water off there as I can. Right? I actually had somebody one night tell me that they purposely power washed the belts that day so that they would, stretch because he was mad at his dad and he wanted to stretch more because they were wet. That's not a spectacular situation. All right? trying to be fairly high level. I know it's been a long day, but I will ask if there's any questions from the room regarding seatbelts. In general, not necessarily ours, but in general, seatbelts. Nobody? I will tell you one other thing that the conversation, I'm sorry, I don't know your name either, but the blonde-haired lady, Morgan, when you guys were talking about something, it kind of made me think about when he was up here, I think it was Patrick from the NFPA, I was thinking about one thing that we don't really prepare for and we don't really train for is, remember how somebody else was talking about getting out of the car in 4 directions? Somebody was talking about that, and like that can be really challenging, right? Think about this. As Morgan said, she's part of the safety team, and you don't have to answer. I'm not asking you to answer. Please don't answer, right? Does she know how to release the belts if the driver can't do it himself or herself? Does she know the difference between a latch and a rotary style buckle? Could she potentially, if there's fire in that cockpit and she's trying to help Brian get out of that vehicle, could she do it technically blind by just reaching in there, knowing what to grab, and either A, realizing I need to pull to release that, or I need to grab that and I need to turn that? Does she know that? Again, I'm not asking you to answer, but like these are things we don't know. Here's another thing for a track to think about. If there's a fire and the driver nor Morgan can get that belt disconnected, how do we get them out? Right? There's a variety of webbing cutters that are available in the marketplace. Now, I will tell you, there are some really trash ones that just do not work. And there are some really nice ones that are going to cost 40 or 50 bucks that will cut through any webbing out there like a hot knife through butter. But it's little things like this that make a difference. That's what Patrick was talking about preparation. Right? But think about that. As we were saying, look for, is there a fire extinguisher on the back of these trucks and trailers? Ask about the fire equipment. Ask them what happens if somebody can't get out. Do you know how to release that? Right? I would ask her to ask herself that. Right? And if she doesn't, hopefully she can go learn that. Right? She can teach her team that she worked with at that racetrack the same thing. But we do have to take some ownership at some point. We can't say it's all the track's fault. We can't say the sanctioning body said this or that. We do have to use some common sense, and we do need to help each other, right?
And I think this is something we were talking about just a second ago, is that with your safety team, and this is, for people online that'll watch later too, you've got to make sure that if you do have people coming in that aren't there every week, they're volunteering, they're doing whatever, that's great. They need to know about the series that you're working with. You need to take them up to a car and say, okay, these are the kind of belts that they have. This is how you undo that. This is how you take the steering wheel off. This is where the kill switch is. This is where you can safely hook up the tow truck to. They've got to know about the series that you're working with every time and what's different about that series.
Yeah, you make a great point about the steering wheels as well, and this is just flashing me back to early days of racing. Most of the steering wheels go like this now. But remember the old ones? Some of them on some of these older cars, they have that little side plunger where you pull it out. Like, do you know the difference between pulling out the plunger to release it and actually clasping that one and collapsing it to release it? That's a great question as well.
And even getting the driver, if that driver is out and they cannot get themselves out of the car, you have to be able to figure out how to safely get them out of that car. If you're worried about a spinal injury or whatever, you've got it. Every car is going to, like, getting someone out of a midget is going to be totally different than a late model. Like, you've got to be able to work with every series.
Exactly. And with these seats, the one thing I'll point out about the seat, I'm sorry, what's your name? Joshua. I don't need you up here, Joshua, but when Joshua just got in the seat a minute ago, the seat actually fits Joshua really nice. But the way that the right side headrests are now, he has to twist his body to get in there. Do we want to twist the body if there's a back injury? Absolutely not. So we have to be thinking, okay, how am I going to get him out of that seat where it appears that I'm not sure how he got in the seat because he's literally right underneath this side of the headrest, right? And those are things that we definitely need to think about as well. Anything else? I think we covered expiration date. little bit of mounting. You certainly want it to be as close to just directly off the shoulders as you possibly can. One thing I do want to mention about the back, this came up in the conversation over here earlier, is not necessarily on the newer modifieds and the newer late models per se, but yes, some of the stock cars are still produced this way. I've seen new ones still produced this way. The mounting point for the shoulder harness should not be on the rear clip. It should be off of the roll cage, right? Think about this. If this is back here where it used to be, there's a pipe coming back in this direction, right? Everybody follow me? There's a pipe here, and we put a hole here, we put a tab here. And another car comes in this direction, and it hits the rear end of this car, and it tries to shear the rear end off of that car. What are those belts going to do to the person that's sitting in this seat? It is going to rip them apart, all right? So anybody who's manufacturing, I hope we're completely almost away from that, but I'll be honest with you, I've seen some high dollar street stocks in the last 2 years. A couple of modified brands are still doing that. We've got to get that back on the roll cage and get it off the clip. All right. Anything else from anybody? Feel free to come by if you have any questions for me. We're right inside the door. If you want to test the seat out, even if you don't fit in it exactly, you'll get an idea of what the belts feel like. If you've never done the ratchet belts, I suggest you come by and try them out just to understand what it is. All right? Appreciate everybody's time.